means that the number one pick in the 2021 NBA draft goes to the Detroit Pistons.
Who's got the number one pick in this year's draft? Who's got the number one pick in this year's draft?
Basketball!
Select Isaiah Stewart.
The Detroit Pistons select Killian Hayes.
Sadiq, that was absolutely sensational.
I don't know what went into that process. I met the criteria to be selected, but I wasn't.
From long range. Oh! Yes!
Detroit basketball! What is going on, Pistons fans? Welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, brought to you by Believe. Aaron Johnson here with you. Joining me is Jasper Apollonia. Jasper, the Pistons coming off of an exciting regular season opener, a win at home against the Orlando Magic, a 113-109 win. The Pistons were 3.5-point favorites. They covered, barely, but they covered, kind of sticking with the trend of last season, even though most of the time when the Pistons were covering last year, it was because they were the dogs, not the favorites in the matchup. But an exciting win for Detroit. I'm sure you're ready to talk about it, but how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Really fun win for the Pistons last night. Great way to start open the season. We're sorry we don't have Mike. We thought we were going to have him. We were hoodwinked, bamboozled, and led astray. However, you and me are both here. And, Aaron, honestly, I've been racking my brain all day. I don't even know where to start with this win because there's so much to talk about from last night's game. A ton of positives, definitely some negatives. But, I think we should probably start with the headlines. And I think the headlines are all about Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey today, aren't they? Both of those guys just looked great last night. Both had some kind of up and down preseason. We weren't 100% sure if Jalen Duren was quite going to be ready coming into this game, coming into this beginning of the season. But boy, he sure looked ready last night. So did Jaden Ivey. They were both in their own pretty unique ways, almost impossible for the Magic to stop. Jaden Ivey had 19 points. Second leading scorer for the Pistons. He had 4 assists, 3 rebounds, 3 steals. He was a blur on the court. And then Jalen Duren coming in with the second unit, 14 points, 3 blocks, 10 rebounds, and an assist. Some absolutely fantastic defense across the board from him as well. Aaron, what did you think about the Pistons' 2 new acquisitions from this offseason? There were some other acquisitions that also had big games, but those 2 rookies in particular, how did you feel about the Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren experience?
Yeah, they stole the show. I mean, the rookies were phenomenal, and the numbers, the efficiency proved it. The highlight plays that they made in an arena that was so loud, so energetic. We've heard from so many people at the game that, this was one of the best atmospheres for a Pistons game that they've ever been a part of. Everybody showed out last night for this game. And I think, seeing those 2 excel the way that they did, it's not a question that they jumped off the screen more than anybody else on the Pistons side of the floor. It was really a great game for all 3 of the top rookies in this matchup. Paolo Banchero, a 27-point outing. He was phenomenal as well.
And that poster he put Corey Joseph on in transition. My goodness. What a way to enter the league. Am I right? Whoa.
Yes. He was everything as advertised, but more. He was special. And I want to talk about all of that stuff. Before we really get into it, though, we should talk about our sponsor, BetOnline. BetOnline is back, and it remains your number one source for all your football betting needs this season, as well as basketball. I don't know about you, Jasper. I had a parlay out there last night. I lost it by a rebound. Tough luck, but I love basketball betting. But at BetOnline, you'll find the latest odds, matchup info, players news, and game trends. And as your continued source for all sports wagering info, BetOnline features live betting, free contests, live scores, and giveaways all season long. Always the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports and events like MLB, MMA, tennis, boxing, NBA, NFL, and even golf. Head to betonline.ag to join and receive your 100% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use our promo code BLEAV, BLEAV, to receive your rewards. Bet online where the game starts. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, the Pistons covered their covering machines dating back to last year. They did it again yesterday in a win against the Magic. I lost my parlay by one single rebound. I'm not going to cry about it. I'm glad basketball is back. I love betting basketball. I think it's very fun to do, and I'll be doing it all throughout the year with Bet Online.
Same here, Aaron. Opening night, I had a 10-leg parlay that I lost by one Al Horford rebound. I had him at 5.5 rebounds. He got 5 exactly. It was that was pretty tough. I can't lie. That was a tough one on opening night. But you know what? The games have been great so far, and I'm definitely going to keep on throwing money on these Pistons to cover. Last night, I think, showed a lot of both the upside and downside with this team, right? I think we should obviously the rookies were the highlight, but we should kind of go through the game a little bit because the Pistons started off doing all the things we were terrified of them doing during this preseason. They started off with just some of the worst defense I've seen in a second. They had 3 great plays to open up the game, start off with 3 scores, and Jaden Ivey got his first points for the first bucket of the first Pistons game of the season on a beautiful cut to the basket. Cade Cunningham found him, knew exactly where he was, and Ivey just finished that thing no problem. And that's obviously one of the things that we're so excited about him is that he has that off-ball cutting ability. You saw it from the very first play of the game. But then the Pistons, before you knew it, halfway through the first quarter, they were down 22-6, Aaron. 21-6. And it was pretty gross. And then Jalen Duren and Killian Hayes came off the bench, and things turned around, didn't they? I thought that the additions of Hayes and Duren into that lineup completely changed the game from a defensive perspective. We saw the downside of that lineup from an offensive perspective later on in the third and early fourth quarter, but defensively, those 2 guys were game changers coming in.
I'm gonna push back a little bit there. I think the game really, and this is ironic because I've certainly had a lot of things to say about this player throughout his time, but I think the game really started to change its tone when Corey Joseph entered. I mean, he rattled off a pair of 3-pointers,
Those
8
are huge.
points to really just ignite an offense that was miserable. It was an offense that salvaged just 17 points in the first quarter. And yes, Duren came in and had some really nice plays defensively. His outburst really came once Corey Joseph came in. And then later on, he had a huge fourth quarter. I mean, I think he had 9 points and 5 rebounds alone in the fourth quarter. But I actually think Corey Joseph was what ignited the Pistons. And that being said, that second quarter for Detroit, where they put up 40 points, they looked like a brand new team. It looked like what was advertised of some of the changes coming for this group, that they weren't going to be the same team as they were last year. And in the first quarter, they looked like they were playing last year's brand of basketball. They just weren't getting good looks. They were going late into the shot clock without finding anything. The offense looked bland, it looked stale, it looked stagnant. But things really changed in the second quarter. I'm going to give Corey Joseph a lot of props for that. And I'll give the newcomer, Bojan Bogdanovic, a lot of props for helping continue that. Really, he was stellar throughout the night. But that third quarter for him was huge. He was great. I think the rookies deserve so much props for the way that they came in. I mean, hey, remember last year, Cade Cunningham's debut, he really, really struggled, 2 points, never really found his flow in the game. And that just wasn't the case for either of Detroit's rookies. Ivey was comfortable right off the bat. You could see his speed, his athleticism, his fearlessness going at the rim, all of that evident right away. I mean, hey, he was the guy that got the Pistons on the board first in that ugly first quarter for them. And he just really did his thing throughout the night. Looked like he had been playing in the NBA for 4 or 5 seasons and was very, very comfortable in his shoes. And Jalen Duren, I keep going back to him, but I'm absolutely stoked that he's looking like he's ready to contribute on a nightly basis as an 18-year-old. I mean, he's the youngest player in the NBA. The stat yesterday was he was the youngest Piston in franchise history to record a double-double, or it might have been recorded double-double on opening night, and then like the second youngest Piston to
No, the youngest. The youngest Piston ever to record a double-double. Yeah, not even 19. Incredible.
Yeah, it makes me feel really bad because I'm sitting here at 22 and I've done absolutely nothing compared to Jalen Duren. I just host a podcast.
Try being 29 and also hosting the same podcast, Aaron. No, I mean, look, I agree with you. I thought the rookies were obviously the highlight, and I'm glad you said Bogdanovich because he was, I mean, that late second quarter into the third quarter, he was massive. He started off the game 6 of 7 from 3. He made some really good plays outside of just his shooting, though. He had that sequence where he drew an offensive foul, and then comes back down, hits an open 3. He was great, and you see exactly what he brings to this team. I know you gave Corey Joseph a lot of credit, and I agree with you. Those back-to-back threes he hit were absolutely tremendous for Detroit just to get them back into the game offensively. But I don't agree with you that he was the sole reason for it. The Pistons were in real danger of getting blown out from the first quarter on. And you know that the first quarter obviously is, teams put up big leads in the first quarter and then they evaporate all the time. But the problem was that team was not playing defense. They looked just as bad as they did in the preseason. The switching wasn't working. Jalen Suggs was getting what he wanted. Paolo was just overpowering. I don't want to say that Beef Stew had a bad game. I thought he had an okay game. But Jalen Duren was definitely more impressive. I really think, though, the difference came when Killian Hayes and Jalen Duren came into the game and were able to just slow things down defensively. The Pistons weren't getting slaughtered in transition like they were halfway through the first quarter. They were giving up so many easy buckets, so many second chance opportunities. And Jalen Duren being able to come in there and get some rebounds, and Killian Hayes coming in there and being able to slow down the guards a little bit, that's what allowed them to get into a position where a couple of threes could put them right back into that game. And like I said earlier, you saw the downside of it in the third quarter, because that's also a lineup that does not have a lot of offensive firepower. You love that Jalen Duren can give Killian Hayes that lob threat, but let's be real. Without Alec Burks and without Isaiah Livers right now, that second unit is offensively a real problem for this team. They need somebody who can break down guys off the dribble, who can present a more volume-like outside presence than Corey Joseph can. And they certainly need somebody like Isaiah Livers to just put it all together for defense and offense. I'm thinking about Jalen Duren and Isaiah Livers right now as my backup front court. I'm feeling real good about that. And yeah, we don't have to talk about him a ton today, but I do want to give Killian Hayes some credit for doing Killian Hayes things. He had an amazing block last night. He had 3 steals. Opponents shot 16% against him last night. And that was huge because that second unit had to solidify the defense. And then when the starters came back in, I think you saw them kind of get back into it a little bit more on that end, gave up less transition opportunities. For me, that was the turning point of the first half.
Yeah, I mean, Killian had some nice plays defensively, and he moves the ball. Like, that is something that the second unit needs. But we can't ignore the fact that he was 1 of 9 from the field. and Kevin Knox was 1 of 8 from the field. You can't have guys, taking a high volume of shots. I mean, both those guys took more shots than Saddiq Bey, who's someone we probably should talk about here shortly.
Sure.
But Killian Hayes, 1 of 9 from the field. And to me, I look at that and I know Killian Hayes is going to come in and do certain things. But if he can't consistently be a threat to score the ball, it's going to be hard for him to be out on the court a ton, especially when Alec Burks comes back. And if Corey Joseph is playing, something similar to the way that he played in his minutes, I want to see Killian Hayes out there. I thought he was turning a corner in preseason, but the offensive performance from him yesterday, he took 3 3-pointers, didn't really come close on any of them, went inside a couple times, got blocked, airballed a layup. I know he's going to give me defense. I know he's going to move the ball, but sooner rather than later, there has to be a higher standard for him to be a threat to score the ball. And the same thing goes for Kevin Knox, who really the only reason he's ever going to need to be on the court is because he is a theoretical floor spacer. He's a theoretical shooter, and he was 1 of 6 from beyond the arc last night. So, I think getting Alec Burks back, I think getting Isaiah Livers back is going to be huge for this second unit. And I talked about it yesterday, just, in a tweet. I was talking about how the Pistons second unit right now, the one that they had to use yesterday, was so incomplete and it lacked so many options offensively. It really didn't have a scorer in that second unit, and getting really Burks and Bagley back will give them some go-to scoring options. Both inside with Bagley and on the perimeter with Burks. I think that will help them. I think getting Isaiah Livers to space the floor, communicate defensively. I mean, I look at what Livers and Duren can do, and I'm on 100% agreement with you in that regard. Those two managing that defense in the second unit, that's exciting to me. The second unit was definitely underwhelming overall yesterday, outside of Corey Joseph's first half and Jalen Duren's performance, at least for me.
But Aaron, you see how it works. Once you get back Burks, you can see how this second unit can work because you don't have to ask Killian Hayes to take 9 shots. You know what I mean? If he can continue to give you he's the best defender, I think, on this roster. I don't think there's much question in my eyes right now that overall he's their best defender. And he's their second best passer still. So, I mean, he was +6 last night. So I think that once you get back Burks, once you get back Livers and Bagley, it doesn't matter so much that he can't score. And I don't want to talk about him too much, but I thought the fact that he and Duren were +6 and +7, respectively, last night while they were on the floor, I thought that was indicative of what they brought to the team. And the thing I was most impressed about with Duren, 0 personal fouls.
Yeah.
None.
Really.
And he was contesting at the rim with some great physicality, too. He had back-to-back plays where he went up on, I think it was Wendell Carter Jr., and he had one on Wagner, too, that were just fantastic. Arms up, not moving his body, just completely chest to chest. That was, amazing. You said it a couple days ago, and I kind of pushed back on it then, but you know what? Andre Drummond. There's a lot of good Andre Drummond in his game, especially with the physicality and the rebounding and the energy. I thought that was great. The transition poster he had as well was fantastic. Nothing but good things to say about Jalen Duren. He obviously needs more work. He's going up against still a pretty young front court in Orlando. I think he's going to have more trouble when it comes to the slower, more methodical guys who can get him into foul trouble. But yeah, I mean, great stuff from Jalen Duren. And that from a fan perspective is what you want, right? You want a reason to go into this year feeling good. And having the first game go the way it did, I think for fans, it's a reason to be okay, even if they're not going to win a ton of games this year, they're going to be fun, they're going to be exciting, and you can see where the future is with those two guys, especially. Even though Cade Cunningham, I think we should talk about him a little bit, did not have his greatest game.
Yeah, Cade didn't have his greatest game, and he still finished with 18 points and 10 assists. He's just, I feel like he's a guy that comes on slow but ends up finishing strong. And he had the majority of his scoring came in the second half. Majority of it really came in the late third and the fourth quarter when he made a couple threes, got to the rim a couple times. He wasn't phenomenal, but he didn't have to be. I think, you look at what Ivy gave them offensively, you look at what Duren was giving them offensively, and Bogdanovich's ability to just shoot the ball, make some shots. I mean, hell, Cade Cunningham doesn't play with a lot of guys, at least he didn't last year, that could just spot up and hit some threes if Cade threw him the ball. And, that's going to open things up for him this year. The 6-16 shooting, that's not something that I'm, completely, worried about or anything. I think he obviously needs to be more efficient. I think that will come as he settles in and is able to get more comfortable with the guys he's out on the floor with. I mean, he's sharing a backcourt with a new partner, and Bogdanovich is getting a lot of looks. Bogdanovich and Cunningham had the same amount of shots. They each had 16 attempts from the field. But for Cade to come out, not have his best game, still finish with 18 and 10, and the Pistons were still able to get a win, that's pretty dang good for the Pistons. That's a really good thing to see that, last year it was Cade has to flirt with a triple-double, and he's got to get you 25 for this team to really have a chance most nights. That maybe doesn't have to be the case this year with some of these other players in the fold, and I'm very okay with the way Cade Cunningham played yesterday. Wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but he was just fine out there. And again, he finished strong, which a lot of people will argue is more important than the way you finish, than the way you start.
100%. And you saw exactly why he and Ivy make so much sense as a pairing. Maybe somebody will come up with a better nickname for this backcourt. I came up with one last night. They're sizzle and steak, baby. They just go together. Jaden Ivey's the sizzle. He's all that fun stuff. He's the energy. He's the, going to the basket. And it seems like he just won the NBA championship after every make. And Cade Cunningham's the steak, man. He is just that grounded. He's the thing that just keeps it all together. He's always there. He's consistent. He's always calm. He's always cool, always collected. Jaden Ivey does all the stuff that makes basketball fun to watch. And Cade Cunningham does all the stuff that makes you win basketball games. And for me, they are just, you see the vision. You immediately see the vision when they're out there on the court together, because they're like two sides, not two sides of the same coin. They're like sizzle and steak, man. They're not the same thing. They're completely different, but they go together perfectly.
They are the perfect yin and yang duo. The things that Ivy does, obviously different than Cunningham, but you pair them together and they just work. They work. And that's exciting for Detroit. I think it's really, really exciting in terms of Detroit trying to compete this year. And I don't know how much I buy into that, because I hear the way that Troy Weaver and Dwayne Casey talk, and their minds certainly seem convinced that this is going to be another losing season where they want to try to compete more, but they're not necessarily placing an emphasis on winning or getting to the playoffs. The players, on the other hand, have obviously spoken more about winning, as you would expect. You're not going to hear them come out and say, yeah, we just want to get a little bit better, but we know we're going to be a lottery team. I think seeing these rookies come in and look so capable of giving this team big minutes on a nightly basis is the takeaway from yesterday's game. Yes, they won. I like Orlando. I think Orlando and Detroit are really in similar positions where they both have some really intriguing young cores. They're each capable of taking I'd say a significant leap. And the Pistons were able to come out on top and get the win. But seeing Ivy and seeing Duren really lead this team was just so encouraging to me. And I think for Detroit to have two rookies where, as a team that's so young, as a team that is placing an emphasis on their young core, playing their young core, and maybe even sacrificing, competing to a point so that they can play these young guys. I think them looking so ready to contribute on a nightly basis will make this season a little bit more satisfying for the Pistons, for the fans, because they look like guys that can contribute to winning. Maybe they're not perfect. Ivey is certainly going to make mistakes. Duren is certainly going to make mistakes, but they're going to make significant strides to help this team compete. And Ivey looks like a guy that I think could win Rookie of the Year. It's just too bad Paolo Banchero looks like he's a 5-6 year NBA veteran who's been to the All-Star.
I was gonna say, too bad that he had to go up against the guy on the other side of the floor who, to me, is probably going to win Rookie of the Year. Paolo is wow. I mean, hard to say too many good things about what Paolo did last night. Aaron, I think that's a good opportunity for us to kind of transition into maybe some of the less great aspects of last night's game, because we definitely were very excited about everything we saw, but it was far from perfect from Detroit. Fun to win that game, really exciting. They barely beat an Orlando Magic team that was without their starting backcourt. And that is not an amazing sign for your future competitiveness. Neither is coming out in the first quarter and immediately falling behind by 15 points. That's also not a good sign. The things we said defensively about this team in preseason, I don't really feel any differently about it after the first game. Their transition defense is horrible. It's really, really bad. And they're going to give up a lot of points in transition this year. I thought that their half-court defense wasn't much better. And this is, to me, a good opportunity to transition into talking about Saddiq Bey, because he, to me, really did not have his best game last night. Obviously, offensively, he wasn't a huge factor. 8 points on 2 of 5 shooting. He didn't hit either of his 3, 6 rebounds, 3 assists. But he got blown by a lot of times as the individual defender. I really was not thrilled with his output last night. And even from the rookies, we saw a little bit of that. There was a point in the third quarter, I believe it was, when they were fourth quarter, when they were still switching everything. And Jaden Ivey and Isaiah Stewart got mixed up, gave up an open 3. The Magic didn't hit it, but you could just see Jaden Ivey didn't know what he was doing. And it was funny because he had a great play on the other end of the floor. He was celebrating. He walks over to the bench and he's immediately getting chewed out by the coaches for the defensive lapse that he had a couple possessions earlier. That kind of cracked me up. But yeah, I think defensively, I was very unimpressed with Detroit last night, especially, like I said, against a team without either of their ostensible starting backcourt.
Yeah, I mean, the defensive woes, we talked about them in the preseason, and again, they weren't great last night on the defensive side of the floor. I think you did a good job talking about it. I don't really have anything else to add because we've talked about it, in the preseason, and you just talked about it again, and I agree with you on all fronts. For me, the thing that stood out to me the most, this team's going to have to hit a lot of outside shots to compete in these games. 1, because their defense is so bad, and 2, because, look, they started out the game 0 of 8 from beyond the arc. Then they shot nearly 50% the rest of the way through, ended up shooting 14 of 38 from the three-point line. This is a team that is going to have to hoist, and they're going to have to make a lot of three-pointers to compete in games because their defense is so bad, and they don't seem fully in tune on that side of the floor. I'm also shocked that it was this quiet of a game for Saddiq Bey. I mean, 8 points, 6 rebounds, only 5 shot attempts. Like, this is a guy that scored 51 against this same team last season. And he just looked invisible out there, which is not something that we really say about Saddiq Bey a whole lot, because most of the case last year was, even if Saddiq Bey didn't have a big scoring game, he still got up 14 shots a game. Like, he was still going to go out there and get some shots up. And we saw, and it looks like this year, with guys like Ivey, with guys like Bogdanovich now flanking him in the starting lineup, guys that score in their own ways, if Saddiq Bey's not going to step up and go create some offense for himself, there's a greater chance that he kind of falls behind in this unit and, looks a bit more invisible. And if that's the case, and he's not going to contribute for you defensively, which I still think is probably the most disappointing thing about his game. Forget his shortcomings offensively. I think you have the physique, the strength, the ability that Sadiq Bey has, the intangibles that he has, and for him to be, so underwhelming on that side of the floor, for him to just get blown by so easily, like that's disappointing to me. People are going to get worried about Sadiq Bey if things that happened in the Orlando game continue.
Yeah.
And when
look, there's been a lot of talk about Bojan Bogdanovic going to the bench when Marvin Bagley comes back. Is Bojan the guy that should go to the bench if they're inserting Marvin Bagley into the starting lineup? I don't know.
I saw last night from some different, just from different tweets on Twitter, different stuff in the Pistons community. A lot of the word was Bojan Bogdanovic is doing a lot of the things Sadiq Bey was supposed to be doing, and he's doing them better.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, if the Pistons want to get Bagley out there, if they want to get Livers out there, do they look at Sadiq Bey and say, hey, our second unit really could use a guy that could be a bit more of a go-to scorer? I don't know. I don't want to get too ahead of myself.
No, and neither do I. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm saying, Marvin Bagley's out for the next month at least. At least the next month.
I'll put this out there as well. I'd much rather have Sadiq Bey in the starting lineup over Marvin Bagley because I don't see what Marvin Bagley solves for you. And that might be a question that we have to have at a later time.
Yeah.
If
that's a future podcast.
Contribute. If Nerlens Noel is going to come back and get some minutes and contribute, what happens with Isaiah Livers if he comes back and contributes? That's a discussion for a later point in time. But yes, Sadiq Bey, invisible last night. Doesn't have to be a huge story yet. It's one game. The Pistons won. Everything's fine and dandy in Detroit right now. But it is something to keep an eye on because it was obvious that he was not placed at the same level of last year where he was one of their guys that was going to get shots no matter what. Bogdanovic, Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham, and now it's more of a fight for Sadiq Bey to align himself in the offense with some more scoring options out there than the team had last season.
Yeah, and look, we're not making any big declarations about Sadiq Bey here. It is one game, but I think it's something to keep an eye on just to see how this starting lineup kind of gels over the next couple weeks. You still have Livers out with a hip injury. You never know with hips, man. You still have Alec Burks out for, again, we don't exactly know how much longer. So there are going to be, plenty of opportunities for Sadiq Bey in the starting lineup. He was also the last guy off the floor for Detroit in the first quarter. So having him play with those backups a little bit, presenting that shooting threat, I think that's a good thing. I did like what he did inside the arc. I thought he had some really good takes. The two field goals that he did score were both inside the paint, and I thought that they were good looking takes. So I liked that part of his game. But yeah, the defense did not look great, and definitely an underwhelming performance from him offensively. A lot of good, some not so good from this first Pistons game. I definitely am anticipating the return of Burks and Livers because I thought that second unit looked extremely limited in the third quarter from an offensive perspective. I mean, they just could not get anything going. Without Killian Hayes being able to provide any sort of a legitimate scoring threat off the bounce, that offense just stagnated. They had nowhere to go. And I think having somebody like Alec Burks back in the lineup, somebody like Isaiah Livers back in the lineup, opens up that floor. Kevin Knox had a turnover where he was passing it to the corner because that's where Hamidou Diallo he thought should be, but Hamidou Diallo's cutting to the basket because, well, that's where Hamidou Diallo should be, and that's not a problem that's going to happen if Isaiah Livers is on the floor. And same with Alec Burks. That's just not going to be an issue when either of those players are on the floor for you, providing that spacing, providing that scoring bounce off the dribble. I think that those are two guys that they really, really miss right now. I don't know how much they miss Nerlens Noel. I don't know how much they miss Marvin Bagley, but those two for sure, they're going to make a huge, huge difference when they come back.
I agree. I actually have more of an overarching discussion point with this second unit. I cannot for the life of me understand the year after year decision making to run a full 5-man bench unit all the time. I do not understand the decision to not stagnate some of your guys. That's the perfect opportunity to get Saddiq Bey some more looks.
They did it in the first quarter.
Yeah, but it was like for the first couple minutes, or for the first, for the last few minutes of the first quarter. And then the second quarter started and it was all bench unit.
Yeah.
I just think this team, especially right now with the lack of options that they have in the second unit, could benefit from playing Saddiq with the second unit, could benefit from playing Isaiah Stewart a little bit in the second unit. Like, get some of these different guys with this second unit. Maybe you want to keep Ivy and Cade together for whatever reason. But if you are a group that is limited offensively in the second unit, like, I'm sorry, but you talked about that play with Hamidou Diallo. It's like Kevin Knox is looking for him in the corner because offensively, schematically, that's where Hamidou Diallo should be. But in Hamidou Diallo's world, as a guy that might go 1 of 10 from the 3-point line, Hamidou Diallo should be locked away in the paint and shouldn't be allowed to leave the painted area. So it just creates an issue for Detroit. I think stagnating some of these guys, like, in my mind, I would be bringing Saddiq Bey out first. Like, Saddiq Bey might play the first 6 minutes of the first quarter. He might come out and start the second quarter with my second unit. Just finding a way to get some of your higher end talent always out on the court. I think you see the best teams in the league do that. These teams that have good players, stagnate them so that these guys can get their own looks, have a bigger role at certain situations throughout the game, and it just improves the team's overall talent on the court at all times. I just think it makes sense for Detroit. I think it's so outdated to be, I have 2 5-man units, they're going to all play together, and that's it. I think the Pistons, Dwayne Casey, have to forego that. They're not, because Dwayne Casey's not done that in his time with the Pistons. It has been way more minutes with your 2 5-man units than it's been, integrating some of the starters with the second unit. I just think it's mind-boggling, especially with how banged up Detroit's second unit is. You're playing Kevin Knox, you're playing Hamidou Diallo. Hell, before last night, you were playing a rookie that was 18 years old, the youngest player in the league. Like, obviously, Jalen Duren came out and contributed more than anyone in the second unit, but going into last night, you weren't expecting that.
No, you're completely correct, Aaron. And look, you even saw it. It's like you had times in the quarters where you had Jaden Ivey taking over and you had Cade Cunningham standing in the corner, not really doing anything. And it's like, why not stagger those lineups so you can give Jaden Ivey primary ball handler minutes with your second unit that desperately needs somebody who can score off the bounce, could use some transition scoring, and then when Cade comes back on, you can have him take back over and have Ivy play more off ball. To me, that just seems obvious, but I'm not Dwayne Casey, so I don't know.
Neither of us are. Neither of us are. The Pistons play a doubleheader this weekend, Friday and Saturday, back-to-back. Starts off against the New York Knicks. So we got a couple more games ahead of us before our next podcast. Hopefully we'll have Mike Angelano with us for next week's show. That is going to wrap it up for us. We just went all the way through the Pistons season opener and a win against the Orlando Magic. Jasper, thanks so much for joining me. Always a blast with you, my friend. The Pistons get a win to start off the season. Thanks so much for listening to this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, brought to you by BetOnline and Believe. We will see you guys next week.